Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Massinio,
And I'm Steven Sigman.
and welcome to the weekly movie throwdown. This week, we're finishing up Elmore Leonard month by looking at one of his best, the 1995 movie, Get Shorty, and looking at a perfect example of Hollywood not leaving well enough alone, 2005's Be Cool.
They even discuss at the beginning of Be Cool, he sees a billboard for the sequel to Get Shorty, the film he made inside the film, and he puts down sequels. So right away, it's self-referential, and with good reason because this starts off really strong with Get Shorty. I found it to be a fine film, and so did a lot of people because it's pretty well received. But boy, it just tanks right away when you get into Be Cool. Even as much as it tries to capture that spark from 10 years earlier, it just doesn't do it.
No, it's funny that you mentioned that. Well, yeah, they try really hard almost to kind of pave the way for you to accept that this will be inferior out of the gate, almost prepping you for the idea that sequels usually aren't as good. They also specifically reference PG-13 movies, where obviously Get Shorty was rated R, and this one's PG-13. And he mentions the idea that in PG-13 movies you can only say the F word once. They get it out of the way immediately. Another kind of self-referential joke. Uh, but yeah, the opening sequence, which has James Woods in it, is the only decent part almost of the entire movie, because then it becomes a completely different movie. I don't want to just start bashing and Be Cool right out of the gate. So let's go back. Let's start with 1995. We'll start with Get Short.
Before we do, I just want to say, since you mentioned it, the PG-13 thing, F. Gary Gray, the director of Be Cool, said that when he was approached to do this, it was an R-rated script. And that's what he wanted to do. But as we've seen, really specifically with a lot of Elmore Leonard stuff, the studio stepped in and wanted something different. We saw that with Stick and Burt Reynolds, according to Burt Reynolds anyway. And the studio wanted to change it to a PG-13 film. And F. Gary Gray was just coming off doing the Italian Job, which was PG-13. So he thought, okay, I can make this good. And he regretted it pretty much immediately after release. Or maybe I don't know, maybe that's an easy out for why it's so bad. I don't know. But yeah, let's start at the beginning with Get Shorty.
Yeah, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say it certainly didn't help. I think, yeah, why can't we just accept that Elmore Leonard adaptations need to be rated R and be done with it? I'm not
Yeah,
really sure what the obsession 13 thing is, but that's neither here
yeah.
nor there. So yeah, so we'll go back. We'll go back to 95. And interesting to talk about here because we did stick 85. And yeah, it kind of killed off the Elmore Leonard adaptations for a little while. Well, I mean, you get 52 Pickup in 86, which is a pretty decent movie. But clearly that one would have already been in production. And then there's nothing. There's a movie that he actually co-wrote the screenplay on, The Rosary Murders in 87, but the only other adaptation of a book was a TV movie, I think in 88. It was
Hmm.
called Glitz. So, and that, as far as I know, is the only other adaptation of an Elmore Leonard book that's done between 52 Pickup in 86 and then finally Get Shorty in 95. And so it's probably good that they put it aside for a little while. And I think that what you had was a group of people trying to figure out how to be able to bring back really one of the best dialogue writers in terms of novels that I think has ever been. Stephen King is really good at that. But Elmore Leonard is really excellent at writing dialogue. And he's always specifically said that he doesn't even start with plot. He usually just starts with characters, gets them talking, and then figures out where things go from there. And you can almost feel that because every character is very talkative. He makes them very interesting. Uh, so how the hell do you translate that into a movie? It, Many people seem to have failed. Um, but in 95, they decide to adapt Get Shorty. It's Jersey Films, Danny DeVito's production company. Yeah, so they get going. The interesting thing about it that I read was that they were initially looking at Danny DeVito to be Chili Palmer.
Right.
He was the original thought, and part of the idea was that it would be really interesting because he's not very tall, and to play off of the idea that it doesn't matter whether he's tall or not, that he carries himself in a certain way. And that was their original plan. He needed to finish Matilda, the adaptation of the Roald Dahl book, which prevented him from being able to put in the time to star and Get Shorty. So they had to find somebody else. But I think that's really funny because it actually, that almost is self-referential, because they put him in. He plays the Shorty character, who ends up playing a version of Chili Palmer.
Right.
And so that ends up being very amusing. And they reference the fact, well, isn't he too small to play the part? Which is probably what they were thinking originally. So I think that's all very amusing. Maybe it's just me.
It's well cast that they put him as the lead in Napoleon on the billboards that you see.
Yeah.
And also in I think it's in Be Cool, they're kind of blending together now, but Chili sees him and he says he's researching a role playing Johnny Cash, who was like famously like 6'2" or something. So the idea of Danny DeVito playing these very tall characters is kind of a running joke that I think is pretty funny. One of the few funny jokes that runs throughout these films. Let's kind of give the summary of Get Shorty. It's basically an East Coast loan shark who's sent to Las Vegas to find someone who owes his boss money. It eventually leads him to Los Angeles, and it's established pretty early on that he's a film guy. In the opening shot of Get Shorty, he's talking about opening a movie theater, and that's kind of a thing throughout. And he gets to Los Angeles and he's supposed to collect from somebody who ends up being a film producer. And instead of collecting, they work together. And they try to get this money to make this movie, and they try to get DeVito's character, Martin Weir, on board. And then you get the crime element of it, where a lot of people are coming in trying to get money. It gets a little convoluted, I think. I'm really surprised it did as well as it did, because there are just so many sums of money in so many different places that it's a little tricky to follow, but super fun. And ultimately he gets to make his movie while he's trying to fund a film for Gene Hackman's character. He's actually pitching his own movie on the side, which is the movie he's in, essentially, Get Shorty, which is kind of a fun self-referential thing too. But yeah, it's a unique kind of story, I think. Reminded me of State and Maine a little bit, the David Mamet film. Less the crime, but a lot of dialogue and a lot of trying to get a film made. But yeah, it's a nice little shot at Hollywood, and kind of speaks to Elmore Leonard's sort of love-hate relationship with the city, which is always fun.
Yeah, exactly. As you watch the movie, you get the sense that this is a person that understands the inner workings of the business,
Right.
For good or for ill, and that's what makes it amusing. But you mentioned that the story is kind of convoluted, and I don't disagree, but I think that is a testament to why the movie is so enjoyable, in that you you kind of get what's going on, and there's a lot of ins and outs, but because the characters themselves are so well defined and so well written, and the casting is so good, that's what I would say about a movie. That if all those parts work, the audience will follow you. They'll just kind of go along with whatever the ride is, even if it doesn't fully make sense. And we've seen lots of movies that have plot holes, and it's not that big of a deal, because if you invest in the characters, you like them, it's cool. And this is a good example of that, where you may not fully understand all the self-reference, and that he's working on two movies at the same time, and he's trying to get money from this guy to pay this guy, and you get it or you don't, but it's still fun, and you have the general idea that this guy's coming after Chili, and Chili's trying to squeeze this guy, and they're trying to play off of each other, and enough where you follow it through. But if you have good characters and you enjoy them, you're willing to go on whatever ride they're going to take you.
Right. And the characters really are sort of defined through their dialogue. I mean, as with all Elmore Leonard films. And that's actually, in this case, really a testament to the screenwriter, Scott Frank, who is incredible. I mean, he's gone on to do The Queen's Gambit, Logan, and we've talked about him before because he wrote Out of Sight as well.
And I think what we've learned, now that we've done a full month of Elmore Leonard adaptations, what we've discovered is apparently the only person in Hollywood that can adapt Elmore Leonard is Scott Frank.
Yeah.
He appears to be the screenwriter who truly understands what Elmore Leonard's trying to do, and can replicate it for a screen.
Well, Tarantino comes in close second.
That's a fair point. But I think with Tarantino, he really took it and made it more of his own.
Mm-hmm.
So it feels more like a Tarantino movie than it does an Elmore Leonard adaptation. That's the only reason I put that one aside.
Right.
Whereas Get Shorty and Out of Sight really do feel like Elmore Leonard projects. They feel more like the style of the way that he writes.
Right.
Whereas Jackie Brown falls more into the kind of film that Tarantino makes. Maybe that's just me, but you're right. He's definitely second on the list. A
Yeah,
very small list, unfortunately.
right. I read an interview with Elmore Leonard where he said, "I never know what the themes of my books are until Scott Frank tells me."
Huh,
So that
really?
kind of tells you where he is with Scott Frank. Um, but yeah, and in Get Shorty, there was actually a lot of discussion around losing the sort of Elmore Leonardness of the dialogue. And it wasn't until Travolta came on, which that's kind of his own saga, um, until he came on and convinced the studio to keep it true to the book. And thank goodness, I can't even imagine what it would have been if it weren't true to the book the way it is. So
I can tell you what it would have been like.
because you read it.
It might have been Be Cool.
Oh, well,
That might be what it was like.
if that were the case,
But
there wouldn't be a Be Cool.
that's right.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, speaking of Travolta, I mean, getting back to it and talking about Tarantino, I mean, everyone knows John Travolta's story and everything, and Pulp Fiction being his comeback, and I agree with all that. However, to me, Get Shorty and not Pulp Fiction is really the thing that made Travolta officially back, because Pulp Fiction, he comes back and is good in that movie. You know, it's an ensemble movie. He's a small piece in it. Uh, he's excellent in the movie, but that could be a one-off. He basically could have his career could have gone back to talking baby movies after that. Who knows?
Right.
But doing Get Shorty and really being the centerpiece of it, and after you see him play the character, I mean, you hear about other people that were supposed to be looked at, not just Danny DeVito, but I think Warren Beatty was discussed, Michael Keaton was discussed. Once you see John Travolta in the part, I can't think of anyone who could have played it better. He's just so, it feels like the role that was made for him to play. And to me, this is really what announced that Travolta was officially back and could carry a major movie and really was a movie star. Reminded you that John Travolta is a movie star. So that when I think we get Shorty, that's what I think.
And I'm glad that this sort of launched him again because he would go on pretty much right after this. I mean, there were a couple weird things in there, but he would go on to work with John Woo and make Broken Arrow, and then finally the pièce de résistance Face Off with Nicolas Cage. So thank goodness, because I couldn't see anyone but him in that role either.
Hell yeah. I believe that maybe we'll eventually do a whole month of just face movies, possibly, just so we can face off. We'll have to figure out if we can make that work. God, that was such a good movie.
I
Such
think
a
we could do
good term.
like a 4-part episode on Face Off. Just make it a whole 4 hour, 4 hour
Yeah.
long film. Yeah. But yeah, Get Shorty, it really was a success and a little surprising, I think, for the time, because this was sort of the beginning of all of these independent films and maybe kind of right at the start of them. But um, it, yeah, it did pretty well. I don't know. And culturally, I think, uh, I don't know, maybe it doesn't have sort of a lasting effect on culture, but I think, like you said, it cements Travolta's comeback, and that in itself has an effect on the culture. Um, Great cast.
Yeah, I think it stands out for that. And yeah, good. You were about to take the words out of my mouth. I'm talking about the cast, just so well cast.
Yeah, I mean, there are some real heavy hitters in this. Travolta, Rene Russo, who's kind of really in the middle of a good run of films here. Maybe like the only run of films that she would have ultimately. But she was doing, a ton of stuff around the time that was pretty good. Um, you
Yeah,
know,
right about the time she ends up kind of walking away from Hollywood for a little while. Uh, I think she just gets burned out. But there was a period of time where I mean, she was just in a ton of good projects, and I think she's just an excellent actress. And this really gets to show a lot of what she can do. That just that world weary, kind of burned out, seen it all kind of character. She's really excellent in it. But
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. This is just another drop in a really good run for her. Uh, Forgetting Major League Two, of course, we'll just ignore that one. But in the Line of Fire, Outbreak, Tin Cup, she was good in. She was in Ransom,
Yeah.
and then she was in Thomas Crown Affair. She's done a lot of good work.
Yeah, the 90s were really good for her. Then it kind of died off, which is unfortunate because I think she's fantastic.
Well, that was a conscious choice. I think I read somewhere that it was her choice. Like after like in the mid 2000s, I think she just kind of got burned out, decided she didn't feel like doing it anymore, walked away for a good 5 6 years, and then came back to do Thor. Good, I guess, good choice on our part. We need to come back and Marvel was the way to go. So I guess good work.
I don't know. I think Big Trouble with Tim Allen probably is the real reason she walked away. But yeah, some other people in this, Gene Hackman, of course, who's sensational, not a comedic actor, and he doesn't really play comedy in this film, but he's like the straight guy who's super funny.
Yeah, which is exactly what they told him when they tried to cast him in the part. He said, "I don't do comedies." He's like, "I'm not funny," and they said, "We don't need you to be funny. We just need you to be you. Just play the character. Just play the character, and it'll be fine." And of course, it was because he's just naturally funny in a way, and just good at acting. So that helps.
Yeah, and you have I think an early role for John Grease, who would go to play Uncle Rico in Napoleon Dynamite.
Yeah,
Really love seeing him there. But actually, two people I read who were considered for his part were Steve Buscemi and Matthew McConaughey, which I couldn't see either of them really in that role. That is a very much a specific John Grease part to me. But you have Delroy Lindo, David Paymer, who's wonderful. I just love that guy and everything. Um, Another single scene in an Elmore Leonard film for Alex Rocco,
that's
who
right.
just a one and done guy for Elmore Leonard. It's amazing.
Yeah, and the best
Um,
part is the scene immediately reminds you of The Godfather because
right.
he's getting a massage on the table when he gets killed. So it's just like an immediate thought the minute that you see him, and I really love that.
Yep.
He's just playing a character of a mob guy. But yeah, that's funny. Second time in a row we've seen Alex Rocco in a small part in one of his movies.
And then, of course, you have Dennis Farina, who is the master of being somewhere else and coming to the story and just getting shit done and then taking off. I mean, that doesn't work out in this case, but it's very reminiscent of Snatch to me, which we just covered.
Yeah, it's really funny how we've done 8 movies and there have just been certain actors that just keep showing up. And Dennis Farina is a movie throwdown pod all star at this point, where he just keeps showing up in movies that we like.
Yeah, and I was gonna save this for later, but it makes me beg the question, would Vinnie Jones work in this film? Because he's in almost everything we've done so far. Um,
Sure, he could have found something. He could have paid. He maybe could have played the James Gandolfini part. Who knows?
yeah,
Maybe that could have worked. And
fair.
speaking of James Gandolfini, I mean, this is the first thing I had ever seen James Gandolfini.
Oh, wow.
I mean, well before he becomes Tony Soprano, um, and he's really enjoyable in this character because he plays him with a little bit of heart
Yeah,
and a little bit of humor. And I wouldn't do this right out of the gate, but of course you compare it to the character and Be Cool that's played by The Rock,
right.
another bodyguard character, and you just see the difference between a character that's grounded in a little bit of reality, even if it's a bit of a fantastical character, and a character that's not grounded in reality in any way. It becomes a caricature, and that's the difference.
Yeah, it's grounded in gay stereotypes.
Yeah, you can almost feel that Bear is a real person, whereas Elliot's character in Be Cool doesn't feel real at any point.
No.
It just feels like a plot point, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Anyway,
But lastly, in this film is Bette Midler in an uncredited role, which was really great to see. I did not expect to see her come in. And she's in it for two scenes.
I had forgotten that she was in it, and I think Bette Midler is one of the great comedic actresses. It's always good to see her, and she worked with Danny DeVito, of course, in the past. They did Ruthless People together, which was really fun.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, whenever you get a chance to spend time with Bette Midler, I think that's time well spent.
I agree. And then, these two films work great in analysis because the people behind the camera are so important. And we kind of learned that with Steven Soderbergh on Out of Sight, which was arguably the best adaptation of an Elmore Leonard novel. Um, but you have Barry Sonnenfeld directing this. It's very early in his career. We mentioned Scott Frank wrote it, and he has, so many great accolades. But Barry Sonnenfeld, very early on, um, and he has a vision. I think he sort of sets the groundwork for what Be Cool would be, even though F. Gary Gray goes on to direct that. And um, there's actually a visual style to this that I really love. And I think part of that is Barry Sonnenfeld, because, before he was a director, he was a cinematographer. And notably, he worked with the Coen brothers on some of their early films. And I think you really see a lot of that style here. I mean, there's a very Coen-esque look to this film. Jeffrey Kimball actually photographed it, but you can see that influence from the Coen brothers with, like, dark scenes with kind of the light coming through the blinds, very blood simple, and a lot of the perspective shots, that you'd see in like Raising Arizona and things like that. So there's a real visual style that I think lends itself to this that Be Cool doesn't really pull off, and that's because Barry Sonnenfeld wasn't at the helm. Um, and yeah, I mean that's such an important thing, the people behind the camera, even with a great cast like that. I mean, we see a great cast in Be Cool, but it just doesn't work. And the direction is a huge part of that, and the writing. So they just assembled a really good team here, and it worked out.
Yeah, I think you said it right. It's a great compare and contrast where you look at people that really seem to get it, who understand the work, who understand the source material, and then people who don't. But again, um, Get Shorty gets to be a rated R movie, which it needs to be.
Right.
And we find out once again the studio seems to be obsessed with PG-13 movies, wholly R rating from Be Cool, and it becomes a completely different movie. It just becomes a sillier movie. I don't know if that is was part of where it went because they changed the rating. It just went from being gritty to being almost bright, and I just don't think that tone holds up very well in Elmore Leonard. Um, he writes things that are funny, but he doesn't write things that are silly. And watching the opening of Get Shorty, I really forgotten how Get Shorty started. And it's interesting that the opening sequence with him and Ray Bones, Dennis Farina's character, uh, when they initially see each other, there's the whole thing with the coat, and then he ends up punching him in the face and uh, shoots him in the head. And I thought that was pretty broad. It felt really broad to me.
Yeah.
And I, I at first I was a little concerned, thinking, well, yeah, that's a little more broad than I'm used to seeing in Elmore Leonard stuff. Lean almost towards a farce, like a cartoon, where he shoots him right above the forehead, and he runs away almost like a cartoon character. And it's like, wait, whoa, that seems really out of character for Elmore Leonard stuff. But that's the only time we really see that. After that, it becomes much more grounded. And even Dennis Farina's character, even Ray Bones, never that silly again. He is in a few scenes legitimately frightening. You
Yeah.
remember he is a gangster, and he's no joke. And that's important. That it always comes back to a grounding idea that this is not a cartoon. It tries to play it as real as possible. Um, so that's why it ends up working. It gets on a track where there's funny within the movie throughout the characters, but it's not really played for laughs. Where Be Cool is almost the exact opposite, where it feels like a whole movie of the opening 3 minutes of Get Shorty.
Right.
And Elmore Leonard played broadly for laughs. He's not a comedy writer. This isn't the Naked Gun or something like. That's not what we're doing here. And it doesn't really work. It's not going to work,
Yeah.
and it doesn't.
The tone is sort of consistently the thing that these filmmakers get wrong with Elmer Leonard, it seems. And in this run of films with Jackie Brown and this and Out of Sight, it seems like even though this is tonally, I think, a little bit different, it plays for laughs a little more than the other two. It still feels like right. And I mean, you've read Elmore Leonard, I haven't, so I don't know, but these three, it seems like they work because they got that tone right. And everything else, I mean, we go back to Stick and The Big Bounce, and they are just like wildly off the mark in two different directions. And that seems to be kind of the thing that would plague Elmore Leonard in these adaptations and make him grow cranky about Hollywood. Um,
Yeah, I think Hollywood has a hard time of kind of being able to almost being able to mix tones. I guess they just decide it has to be this or this, and um, and that's never what Elmore Leonard works are. And I think of it because I recently just watched The Departed again, and I think of Scorsese in that way too, um, where Scorsese deals in very dark subject matter most of the time,
right,
especially his gangster pictures. But they are funny, but they're not funny in a ha guy falling down the steps kind of way, of course. It's not comedy funny. It's yikes, this is outrageous funny. Almost I have to laugh because it's frighteningly scary funny. Like there's a certain tone of humor when you're dealing with dark material and dark characters. And Elmore Leonard's really good at that in his work, at being able to walk that line where they're funny in just the way they interact with each other or the way they're trying to pretend to be something they're not or the way things unfold. But it's never just set up joke. It's not how he writes or the right tone for his work, I think.
right.
And as we've seen, that's how it plays out.
Yeah. And man, now you have me thinking about Scorsese films, and I almost think the king of comedy is like close to an Elmore Leonard novel without the full-on crime aspect of it. Um,
Right. I just love the thought of people going to see the King of Comedy in the early '80s and think, oh, it's a comedy movie with Jerry Lewis. I mean, walking out of the theater just shell shocked. Like that's I just find that really amusing.
yeah, I mean Jerry Lewis is the like most ironically funny character in that film. It's pretty great. Um,
We could spend a whole bunch of time talking about that. Maybe the character in King of Comedy would be the closest we ever got to see to the real Jerry Lewis, but that's neither here nor there. That's another podcast.
there are a lot of plane shots in this movie, transitional shots of planes departing and arriving. There are six of them I counted. It really stands out, which is I don't get it. I mean, I understand the reason for it, but boy, they just really jumped out at me, and it was a little confusing.
What was confusing? Why you didn't know where anybody was going, or it just felt like it.
Well, it's just confusing why they would lean into that so many times in one movie. I mean, we've established you're at the airport, somebody had to fly to get there. Great. You don't need all these transition shots.
We call it a theme. It's a nice way to kind of show that there's a lot of movement going on in the movie. I don't know. Maybe he just likes shooting planes from underneath. I don't
There are a lot of repetitive things in these films. In Get Shorty, you have the whole look at me thing, which is like maddening by the end. I get so tired of it. But um, the recreation of the original scene where Harry meets Chili at Karen's house, uh, they redo that which with Chili in bed with Karen, which I think is great because it really shows the contrast between his character and Harry. Um, that's going to be recreated with The Rock and with Cedric the Entertainer's character in Be Cool. Um, there are just so many examples of this throughout. There's Chili when John Grease and Delroy Lindo show up at Harry's studio. Chili tells Harry where to stand, where to sit these guys, what to say. And it was to the point where when I was watching Be Cool and he sets it up with Uma Thurman at the record studio, I told my wife, oh, he told her not to talk about this contract or whatever it was. I forget. She's immediately going to talk about this contract. And she did, because that's what happens in the first one. It's very repetitive, and I don't get it. I think that really sort of dampens both of them for me, actually. I love the idea of redoing something and calling back to it, but over and over again, it gets so like redundant and kind of kills the effect of it. Did you notice that stuff?
Yeah. So I guess we could jump in and Be Cool now. Unfortunately, and I have a lot to say about this and all the reference points. And the problem is, what you said makes sense. Having a recurring bit is one thing. But the problem with doing reference points is if you have a movie full of reference points that remind you of a better movie, you're in trouble.
Right.
And almost the entirety of Be Cool, I'm being reminded of movies that are better than the movie that I am watching.
Yeah.
And that's just a really bad bit of writing. Um, yeah, just calling back to things that remind people that your product is garbage is never a good idea. So, and just to be clear, as I said, whenever I watch one of these movies and I feel like it's truly terrible, I'll go back and read the book again because I just have to remind myself of, was the original source material this bad? So go back, read Be Cool. And it's really night and day. It couldn't be more different. And the thing is that it seems like the screenwriter for Get Shorty, I'm sorry, for Be Cool, was basically trying to rewrite Get Shorty,
Right.
but not actually write an adaptation of Be Cool. Because the story of Be Cool in the movie is almost nothing like the story in the book. There's a few pieces that match. The opening scene with the record exec getting shot is almost the only thing that's note for note, and everything else about it is really completely different. And what you have are these constant reference points to Get Shorty, which are not really in the book either. It's its own entity. So it's very frustrating to just kind of watch someone almost doing a paint by numbers redo of Get Shorty trying to recapture that magic. Like in Get Shorty, the main plot is moved forward by the key to the locker.
Right.
And in this one, instead of the key to the locker, you have a check ticket for a pawn shop. Um, Not in the book. That's not in the book at all. Really. The pawn shop is not a recurring thing in the book at all. So he's just trying to recapture the beats of Get Shorty.
Do you think he felt because it was 10 years later nobody would remember? I mean,
I don't know, but I don't. I think that they want people to remember Get Shorty because people liked it, and I think they're just trying to be like, hey, this is the same kind of thing. You'll like it as much. But here's the other main problem, right out of the gate. So Be Cool starts with John Travolta sitting in a car with another character talking inanely about things. They discuss someone being thrown out of a out of 100-story window. You have a discussion with somebody thrown out of a window, and then of course you have a mid-movie scene where Uma Thurman and John Travolta dance together. And by that point, I'm furious because why do you want to keep reminding me of Pulp Fiction, an infinitely better movie than the movie you are making?
right.
You gain nothing from reminding me of something that makes your product look inferior. So I don't understand what you're doing. I don't know why you're doing it. I mean, that's reference point taken too far. You could like maybe note it a little bit,
Right.
but when you're driving it home and reminding me of Pulp Fiction, I'm probably just going to watch Pulp Fiction. I don't get it. Just because Uma Thurman and John Travolta are in a movie together does not mean they have to dance. And dance to the Black Eyed Peas, no less. I mean, that whole entire sequence, I basically had to fast forward it because I couldn't sit through it.
There's no real point for it, other than to get them to dance.
None. Other than the audience going, oh, wow, we get to see them dance together again. I don't need to see that.
Yeah, I think the screenwriter and the director rely on nostalgia a lot, of those two actors being together. And yeah, it's almost like out of time because it's relying so much on things that aren't in 2005. Even though it's set in a business that I think is very 2005. But we should say that the writer of this is Peter Steinfeld. He doesn't have a lot of writing credits to his name. He wrote 21, the Kevin Spacey card film, and Analyze That, the sequel to Analyze This.
Yeah, I think that's a really good. That was the thing that stuck out to me. So he made Analyze That, the inferior sequel to Analyze This,
Right.
and Be Cool, the inferior sequel to Get Shorty. Where I guess that his whole style is just taking things that were funny and trying to rewrite them in enough reference points where he thinks that he can make a similar movie. And it's like, it didn't work either time. I don't mean to crap on this guy who I don't know very well, and I've only seen the work he's put out. Maybe the studio has messed with his screenplays. I don't know.
I'm sure they are.
I don't want to just say someone's terrible at something, but those two movies are both really good examples of Hollywood's obsession with sequels and why you should just leave things alone.
Here's a really fascinating thing about Peter Steinfeld. He had a pretty promising career in mixed martial arts, and he was convinced to quit doing that and start writing films by Cormac McCarthy. So that's his trajectory. Cormac McCarthy told him to quit his career and start writing films, and this is what he ended up writing, maybe 4 or 5 films, including Be Cool. So he took a beating outside the octagon, I guess, with some of these scripts, but boy, yeah, it's really shocking. And like you said, the studio almost is always involved, and that was kind of a big thing for F. Gary Gray, like I mentioned at the top, that what he signed on for is completely different than what ended up being put on screens, which I think is pretty common. So, you kind of, if you read that Scott Frank article in the New Yorker where he talks about screenplay is more about like creating something than building it, because inevitably what you write is going to be passed on to 5 different people, and what you put on the page is vastly different than what you end up seeing on screen. So I guess that's what happens, but I can't imagine the source material, like the original script, was all that great, because no amount of like studio involvement it's not like they said, let's add this Vince Vaughn character at the last minute, or let's
Right.
add.
We're gonna get to that. I mean, script and casting. I mean, it's everything, and it's like we've acknowledged that the script is not that strong, and the casting. Let's just be clear: the character of Raji in the book is actually black. Okay.
Oh, okay.
I don't know at what point anyone decided that the character of Raji should be played by a white guy who's trying to be black. I don't know where that decision was made. I guess someone thought that would be funny. It's one of the worst casting decisions I can remember. And it ruins the movie in almost every way, because every time I see Raji's character, I want to turn the movie off. I kind of hate every scene. Vince Vaughn deserves way better, but he agreed to do it, so that's on him.
Exactly.
It's I don't even know what to make of it. It's inexplicable to me. What a insane choice. So, and then in terms of casting, you cast Harvey Keitel as one of the main characters in your story, but he already exists
Right.
in the universe as being cast in the movie in Get Shorty. So you've kind of ruined it again, where I'm supposed to now think this isn't Harvey Keitel, this is now a character, but I know I already saw him in Get Shorty as himself, as an actor.
It's very confusing.
It's just lazy almost. I don't understand it. Or if we're trying in any way to pretend anything, it's an easy decision not to cast him. I don't get that part. Um, so okay. The other thing, so I really like movies about making movies, and I like movies about music. The problem with making movies about music is that when you have something where you say that an artist and a song are great, and I've read people discuss this as well, that the problem with Hollywood is they always make stuff where they reference a song or an artist being great, but they almost are never able to prove that. Whereas when you make a movie about movies, you can kind of fudge things, but a song has to be good. And she sits down at the piano, the Linda Moon character, and plays this song called Dreamer, and they're blown away by it. And it's like, this is a mediocre song. Um, and if you're going to have a moment where a character blows someone away on screen, you kind of have to feel it. Uh, that's why the Bradley Cooper version of A Star Is Born really works for me, because Shallow actually ends up being a hit. I mean, it's a good song, and the moment where they sing it feels almost believable because you feel that the song is good. Um, Dreamer's not a good song. And I'm actually a fan of Christina Milian. Sorry, I'm a fan of her. I think she's got a good voice. I think she's a decent singer. So I don't have a problem with her exactly. But again, the whole sequence where Chili and Edie are supposed to be blown away by it doesn't read because the song itself is not very good, and that's a bit of a
Is that an actual song that she put out?
not that I'm aware of.
The lyrics to that song sound like an 11th grader wrote them. I had the subtitles on and I could see it, and it's like the most like uh, I don't know, literal lyrics you could possibly have.
Like,
I am going to ascend. It starts today. I believe I can do it. I'll do it. Whatever they were. I mean, it was hilarious, frankly, how bad the lyrics were. And I think if like a 10th grader went on to American Idol with that song, Katy Perry would be like, wow, that's amazing. But if like a 25-year-old singer with that voice tried to take that to a record studio, she'd be laughed out the door. It's
yeah,
garbage.
yeah. So that's again, that's the problem of making movies about music. That the music has to work, and it doesn't here. The other problem too is, like I said, every character is more of a caricature than an actual person. Even Chili becomes more of a caricature in this movie.
Yeah.
Travolta plays a little bit lighter, and it doesn't work as well. It's not as grounded as it was before. But it's interesting that the character of Sin LaSalle, played by Cedric the Entertainer, is the character I like most in the movie. Actually, like when I say that Cedric the Entertainer is the best actor in the movie, that's probably a bad sign. Uh, I would think, but he's actually very enjoyable in this movie. So even Andre 3000 is way over the top for me. Kind of played like a fool, not great. And the interesting thing is, again, not to be that guy talking about the book all the time again, but all of this, all of those characters, the Sin LaSalle character and all of that,
Mhm.
that is really not in the book. Those characters, there's the rap group called Rope-a-Dope, and the rappers and the Russians kind of taking each other out is very early in the story,
Hmm.
and they're basically out of the plot like midway through the book. But this movie makes the story about them and very much about the Sin LaSalle character. So all of that's almost created out of whole cloth.
Right.
So another part that really just doesn't tie into the original story at all. The story is really about, and this is what's interesting, and this is why I think the book works better and the movie would work better in this way. That Chili's a movie guy and he loves movies. So as he's going through the story of Be Cool, he's really almost doing it because he's trying to make another movie, like he did with the Leo character in Get Shorty. He's kind of walking through this process. He takes on Linda's management almost as a way of walking through this story, and he wants to see how it will unfold because in his mind he sees it as a new movie that he's making,
Right.
and that's how it's portrayed throughout the whole book. Where in the movie, it's really like he's jumped into the music business. And the Linda Moon character is very different in the book. First of all, she's a rock singer. It's not R&B. That's neither here nor there. But it's more about her too. It's about her relationship with Chili and her starting to become a star and how she reacts to that. And the climax of the book is her actually leaving him and signing with a different management company
Oh,
uh, because she's decided that she takes $1 million from Maverick Records and just leaves him, but he doesn't even really care because he's thinking about making his movie. So again, there's all these things that make sense in the book in terms of how the characters would be, or in the movie, it doesn't really make any sense.
right.
So he decides to become a music manager and just immediately successful at it. It's not that easy, and the book goes out of its way to explain all the ways the music business works that make it impossible almost for all this stuff to work this way.
Yeah.
And then the movie just kind of makes it all unfold magically, where she's suddenly doing this, and so it's all just fantastical and not grounded in reality in any way.
Right.
And Elmore Leonard goes out of his way to kind of ground things in a way that feels believable as they unfold. The character doesn't always work. Things don't always work out exactly the way they're supposed to.
Well, I that's the difference between a movie and a book, I guess. You know, it has to be wrapped up and have this happy ending.
I mean, there's a better way to do it because I mean, the truth is, in the book, she still becomes successful, but she leaves him because she becomes actually ascends to being popular. So that could work.
Yeah, but I don't think you can leave Chili Palmer in a Get Shorty sequel, like he has to come out on top. That's kind of the whole.
Well, as I said, the part of it in the book is he doesn't really mind because, like I said, his point is he's going to sell the story.
Right,
He was only in it for the movie anyway
right,
because that's how he sees life, only through the prism of movies. So it was okay for him. So he still comes out on top. Um, there's a character in actually in the book a movie executive who he ends up with at the end of the book.
mhm.
He him and Edie don't have a relationship in that way in the
Okay,
book either. He ends up with a different character who's not in the movie at all. Which is so that that's more interesting too because because like I said, he's a movie guy. That the fact that all of this is seen through the prism of him trying to make a movie is kind of the main subplot of the book itself,
right,
which of course helps because that is his character and that's how he sees things and that's how we see him. Um, but yeah, again, so all of the whole music subplot just feels really silly in a lot of ways. And again, so I mentioned the Elliot character before being kind of ridiculous, and some of the dialogue about Elliot's characters is kind of true in the book as well. But again, the point is the character of Elliot is not played as a joke. He's actually a very scary character. He did time in prison. Uh, he's a legitimately scary guy. He's not like a flaming gay caricature the way he's played in Be Cool at all.
right,
Although I will stop and say, I actually really like The Rock in this part, and I think it was really important for him in terms of his growth as an actor. Being able to show that he didn't take himself very seriously, that he could sing, that he could be silly. All that stuff works personally for him. So good for him. But it's awful in the movie. And the fact that it's kind of played as a joke, slapping his own ass and all this kind of stuff, it's just dumb. And I just found it really annoying. That's just me.
it's actually the last film where he would be listed as The Rock in the credits. So I think that kind of shows maybe he had made the Mummy films before, but I think that kind of shows him growing and becoming more of an actor and less of a wrestling entertainer.
But what's great though is, by the way, the thing I found really funny is I thought that the eyebrow thing was just because they cast The Rock and they wanted to use that because, of course, that's his bit.
Right.
But it turns out that actually is from the book. The fact that he does this eyebrow thing is mentioned in the book as part of the character.
That's probably why they cast him.
Right. So I wonder if they're looking for guys who could possibly play Samoan who did an eyebrow thing, and that list was probably pretty short.
Yeah, that's a
And
short list.
and they found everything else. So I mean, good for him. But yeah, but even that is really kind of talked about, but moved on from. And even midway through where Chili asks him to do the eyebrow thing for another character, he's like, I don't do that anymore. So again, it starts off almost a little silly, but it gets very serious
Right.
because these are serious people and they're kind of scary. And there's always that undercurrent of danger throughout the book. And I think that that's always what Elmore Leonard has, like a baseline of, yes, you may think these guys are silly at some points, but they're dangerous people and they will kill you. And that's always what's underlying.
Right.
And in this movie, it no one actually really feels scary. They all just feel silly. Even from the point where Sin LaSalle's character has that guy in the trunk and starts beating him with a spatula. Like, no one who's a legitimately scary character would do that.
Yeah, there's a footprint on his face. Like it's so cartoonish.
Right. That's a joke. It's like that makes me not take this character as seriously as I should if he's going to be a truly dangerous person in
Yeah.
this movie.
Again, it goes back to the tone. But it's interesting to know about that filmmaking subplot in the book because one of the things that really sort of disappointed me of the many in Be Cool is that the whole premise of Get Shorty is that this guy is a film buff who goes to Hollywood and is just like starry-eyed about filmmaking and to the point where like everything is a reference. I mean, he knows like the entire last scene of A Touch of Evil, and in this film, while he does reference films a couple times, he really doesn't have that whole like energy of the love of film. And that really disappointed me because that was like the foundation of everything that set it forward in Get Shorty. So when you take that out right away, I mean, it doesn't feel like it's true to the first film at all. And it just basically takes like the heart out of it. So, and we should just say that I mean, this far along, but Be Cool is essentially a similar film to Get Shorty, but just in the music business. He discovers a singer who he takes from her manager and promotes her to success, and it's kind of basically all it is, with a little bit of stuff thrown in here and there. But um, yeah, it's just so disappointing. It could have been just as good as Get Shorty, I think. And Barry Sonnenfeld, like I said, was kind of attached early on, but scheduling and just putting off the film delays kind of got him out of the game. So would have been, possibly a better film if he were involved. And
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, because the script itself to me is just the script and casting are just so bad. I think that I don't even know for sure, but it is disappointing because I actually really like F. Gary Gray. I mean, growing up when we grew up too, like I mean, his music videos were just uh, absolutely groundbreaking. I remember being obsessed with his video work.
yeah,
Um, and again, another theme through our things about these video directors coming into film, and that's what was most disappointing. Having a guy who got his start really making groundbreaking music videos, making a movie about music, and having it be completely flat. Even the stuff that he films that's musical
yeah.
doesn't really jump off in any way. But that may be that he wasn't really allowed to do certain things that he wanted to do. I don't know. But even for those parts to fall flat is what's really disappointing. Because I mean, filming music is what he does best. So I have no idea how that. Uh,
I was hopeful at the beginning because the first shot is like the grill of Chili's car, and it just kind of like cuts between different angles of it. I thought, man, this is flashy, like a music video. This is going to be cool. And
right.
but then it is not cool.
Yeah, and of course he ends up directing Straight Outta Compton, a decade later,
Hmm.
a much better film and much more interesting, filmed better. So I mean, yeah, maybe he learned his lessons. I have no idea. Uh, but yeah, I mean that's more along the lines of something that I would think F. Gary Gray would do, being given a movie to make about music. So
Yeah, and I guess it goes back to that studio involvement too. But I'm sure the studio was involved in Get Shorty, and that worked out well. So, but it had the R rating. So I don't know. I
art
wonder
is important.
if so this comes out, Be Cool comes out in 2005, but so does The 40-Year-Old Virgin, which was like a big deal because it was this R-rated comedy. And I wonder if Be Cool had come out like 2 years later, if it would have had that R rating because of kind of the wave of Apatow stuff that was starting to rise. Might have been a different film. I don't know. But again, the writing, the foundation isn't there. Yeah, it's like we said with Clooney in Out of Sight after doing Batman and Robin. He said, you can make a good film, or you can make a bad film from a good script, and you can make a good film from a good script, but you can't make a good film from a bad script. So this is a perfect example of that. But yeah, overall, this is the last week of our Elmore Leonard month, and I think uh, I've learned quite a bit both about Elmore Leonard and filmmaking this month, which is um, pretty interesting. I don't know. I'm sure there are other authors who have been adapted more than him, but it seems like there's just uh, such like a rich vault of work to adapt of his. So it's really fascinating to see how it can be botched so much. Um, like this period was really the three films were it until Justified, right? Like that's something he was very happy with, I think.
And maybe that's part of it that it's because he writes worlds really well and characters that TV is more character driven, and so it lends itself to being done in TV. It's interesting you mentioned that because what I found myself thinking about too is, I mean, Stephen King is a very similar thing where he's a very popular writer.
Yeah.
It's been very hard to adapt his work. And there was a time where people thought that Frank Darabont was the only person that could adapt Stephen King as well. Um, but yeah, I think that when you deal with an author that has a very distinct writing style, um, and I think that possibly since everyone wants to make the project their own,
Yeah.
maybe you walk away from an author with a distinct voice and try to find your own. And in doing that, you end up ruining the project. I mean, that's pure speculation, but that's possible. And the times that the adaptations have worked really well for Stephen King and Elmore Leonard are when they don't really do that at all. They just decide to take the work and adapt it almost verbatim, or at least the tone and the style and a lot of the dialogue, and it ends up working. But when you start messing with it, it's when things fall apart.
That's the irony, is that he's such a cinematic writer, and yet nobody really wants to. And this is a great example of, like, people working from the source and staying true to it, and it works out. So I don't understand why it's so hard. I mean, there have been like 20 plus adaptations, and three of them are decent to good. That it's really, I mean, it speaks to Hollywood more than Elmore Leonard, I think, but uh, it's kind of a fascinating study of screenwriting and filmmaking to me.
Yeah, it's been great, and we've looked at it through different decades and just to try to see, and we've gotten a good lesson in what happens when studios get involved too much in projects, and it's definitely been eye opening, an interesting way to learn about the nuts and bolts of the movie business, and in a way, that's what Elmore Leonard's work is about as well. He,
Hmm.
writes about the nuts and bolts of the business, so even that's instructional. So it's been pretty fun to go back and look at all these things.
Yeah,
Um,
much like our Jason Statham month, I kind of went into this thinking one thing and came out thinking another. So, or in this case, just kind of learning more about it because I didn't know a whole lot about Elmer Leonard. So, yeah, it's been a lot of fun to
isn't that what
sit
this
through
is all
this.
about?
It is. It's an educational show. I
What it's
need
all
to.
about. We go in and feel like we've learned something at the end of the month. That's really all we're hoping for.
Yep, and we do it every time. Um, I want to talk about the numbers for these films. Get Shorty was a success, critically and according to the audience, and Be Cool obviously was not. But Rotten Tomatoes score for Get Shorty, 89% critics, 70% audience, which is pretty good. I mean, usually the audience is a little higher than critics, so it's kind of surprising, but still high end. And
You know what though? I'm not that surprised because again, much like the Academy, critics really like movies about movies as well.
that's true.
I guess I do too. Probably more than the general public. So I'm not that surprised by that. Like the audience doesn't always love self-referential things as much as people who work in the business or are involved in the business do. So anyway, all right.
I can't imagine the critic score for Bowfinger is very high on Rotten
That's,
Tomatoes.
yeah, that's
Um,
fair.
Get Shorty budget was $30 million and it made 115 million worldwide. So did pretty well, quadrupled its money. Opening weekend, it opened at number one, 12.7 million. It's another interesting weekend. Number two is Now and Then, which is a film with Demi
Christina
Moore,
Ricci.
Christina Ricci, Demi Moore. It's like the
Yeah.
generational film. Yeah, Gabby Hoffman's in it, I
Okay.
think. Tom Hanks's wife, Rita Wilson.
Green Wilson. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. That made 7.4. At number three, Seven, which made 7.1 million.
Was
Um,
that its opening weekend?
no,
Couldn't have
it,
been.
it had been, I think it had been out for 3 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. But it always topped the number four film. You'll like this one, Assassins, with your boy Stallone and Antonio Banderas.
Yes. Assassin's super underrated.
It could never top seven at the box office. I don't know if I said it, but Seven actually made $7 million this weekend, and Assassins
Look,
made
don't
3.4.
put me in a position where I'm trying to argue that Assassins was better than Seven. Do not put me in that position.
I don't see how you can make that
But
argument.
I really liked Assassins, but don't put me in that position.
I don't think it's a competition. And at number 5 was another Antonio Banderas film, I think, Never Talk to Strangers, which I have a vague recollection of, but I think he was in it. That made 2.9 million. So pretty decent run.
So Get Shorty was actually #1 for 3 weeks in a row.
Yeah.
Knocked out by, you know what movie knocked it off finally?
What?
Ace Ventura. I believe the sequel to Ace Ventura is what knocked it out of the top spot.
Right. That's understandable. Then we move on to Be Cool, which had a 30% critics rating on Rotten Tomatoes and an audience rating of 42%. Not much higher. Everybody hated this film. The budget is ambiguous. I've read anywhere between 53 and $75 million.
And that again is a really good example where you have a movie that cost 30 million and it just crackles with energy and it looks good,
Yep.
bright and interesting. And you spend more money to make something that ends up seeming more dull. I guess because you're recreating music videos and things like that, and maybe lighting Vince Vaughn's character on fire costs a lot of money. I have no idea.
I mean, it goes to show you that's what they do. That's kind of the sequel curse, where something performs well on a small budget, they just immediately throw more money at it and make 2 more, or 1 in this case. But yeah, and they just until it starts losing money, then they stop. Which was here in this case. It did come in, well, before I get to the weekend, it made $96 million worldwide. So it did make its money back at least.
Too much. Too much money.
Yeah, it really is. It did come in second opening weekend.
The question is, did it make more money than Assassins? That would be very upsetting to me.
Well, it did opening weekend on these weekends that I'm looking at. It did.
It probably did overall too.
Yeah.
But that should not have been.
Well, but #1 that weekend, The Pacifier,
Really?
the Vin Diesel film where he's like some sort of Navy SEAL babysitter.
Can we just stop for a second and think about like the genre of like ex-military guys who were babysitters? It's like a whole genre of those movies. I mean, even Hulk Hogan was in one.
Yep.
Diesel was in one. Jackie Chan was in one. I mean, we might have to do a whole month just on babysitter movies. I mean,
That might be.
yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, that made $31 million this weekend. It must have been opening weekend. I don't see how I can make more than that on weekend number 2. But Be Cool opened with 23 million this weekend. Following behind it is Hitch at number 3 with 12 million. At number 4, Diary of a Mad Black Woman with 11 million. And kind of the outlier here, number 5, $1 Million Baby with $8 million. That had been around for a while, but that really stands out in this list of 5 films on this week.
I'll say.
But yeah, so they both made money. Thank God there wasn't a third one, although you never say never. But yeah, did you have any other closing thoughts about Elmore Leonard month? It was pretty fun.
It was everything I hoped it would be. I laughed. I cried a little bit watching Be Cool. I
got to read some books.
Yeah, I got to read 3 books in a pretty short period of time too. And that's what I took from this. Elmore Leonard books are extremely readable. Like
Yeah.
you can read them in almost like 3 days and you can bang them out because they just move really fast. He's pretty good at writing, and it is just baffling how often people have failed to be able to take his work and adapt it into something that's interesting on the screen. It's just one of those confounding things.
Well, I'm sure we'll get more attempts at it, so we'll stay tuned. But yeah, that's it. And thanks for listening, everyone. It's been another great month. We have some good stuff coming up next month that we'll announce too. But in the meantime, check out our website and our social media. We're at Movie Throwdown Pod everywhere. On Patreon at patreon.com/Movie Throwdown. And that's it. We'll see you next month with a new topic. So long.